Terrence McNally. Welcome to Freeform, a world that just might work. I'm going to be speaking today with science fiction author, activist, and journalist CORY DOCTOROW about AI and a hell of a lot more. He published in Shitification, Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It last fall, and his latest book, just out these days, is The Reverse Centaur's Guide to Life After AI. His website is craphound, one word, craphound.com, and he maintains a daily blog at pluralistic.net. Pluralistic, just that word, .net. On Freeform, we explore the lives, the work, the ideas of individuals that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at politics, economics, environment, science, technology, health, culture, all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. The show plays on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn.com, and podcasts are available at Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, most major podcast sites, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net, TerrenceMcNally.net. CORY DOCTOROW wants to understand what's going on. And I could say at the intersection of tech, culture, economics, politics, society, and art, basically just about any aspects of life you can name, healthcare, education, etc. You get the picture. It feels to me that he wants to understand what's going on big picture so that he can play a part in repairing it. He's a sci-fi writer who points out that sci-fi writers do not predict the future. Rather, they entertain multiple possible futures. They imagine problems and consider multiple solutions. So nothing about the way things are unfolding with AI, technology, or society is inevitable, though that is the contention of those who profit from it. Everybody knows about following the money, but Doctorow isn't easily satisfied. He looks for and finds upstream games being played, where most of the alarm over AI actually serves the hype bubble aimed at big tech's ultimate customer, the investor. If, in protesting AI's threat, we buy into worst-case scenarios, the long-term takeover of society or destruction thereof, we actually promote its value. The drop in stock price, if any of the tech giants were to lose their status as a growth stock, is enormous. But if you're one of the largest companies in the world, if you dominate your sector, how do you remain a growth stock? Well, that's where the AI bubble comes in. Rather than fear AI, Doctorow uses it daily, but he's also skeptical. Stake out that outsider territory, and it helps if you do excellent analysis and tell good stories, and he does both. There is a narrative to his investigation, his diagnoses, and his prescription. He applies a perspective native to sci-fi. Even more than what a gadget does, we need to pay attention to who the gadget does it to and who the gadget does it for. The important part isn't the technical characteristics of any device. It's the power relationships of the people who use that device. I learned a great deal about the systems in which my daily life is taking place reading this book. As I prepare for these conversations, I highlight sentences in books and articles, the ones that I think capture a point and summarize the previous 5 paragraphs I've read, or the ones I think I might want to ask when we speak. Let me just tell you, I highlighted this book a lot. CORY DOCTOROW is a science fiction writer, activist, and journalist. He works for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He's an A.D. White professor at Cornell University, an MIT Media Lab research affiliate, and holds a couple of other academic appointments as well. He's the author of dozens of books, most recently, as I said, in Shitification, Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It, the novel Picks and Shovels, and his latest, the one that we're sort of focusing on, The Reverse Centaur's Guide to Life After AI. His website is craphound.com, CRAPHOUND.com. and he maintains a daily blog at pluralistic.net. Welcome again, Cory Doctorow, to Freeform, a world that just might work.
It's my pleasure to be back on. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Let me tell listeners we're recording this conversation Wednesday, June 17th. I like listeners to get a feel for the people behind the work and the ideas we talk about here. So my usual first question is about how a guest sees their path to the work they do today. I invite them to go way back, childhood inspirations, mentors, turning points, that sort of thing. Let me narrow it just a bit for you. Writing is usually a pretty solitary activity. How did you become an activist and a bit of an investigative journalist, I'd say? And how does your work as a writer inform your activism and vice versa?
Well, I've always grown up around politics and activist politics. That was my folks' work. And so there was never any question that I was going to be involved in political causes. And I also grew up around science fiction and writing. So you mentioned mentors. Like all the best Americans, I'm Canadian, and I grew up in Toronto. And Toronto is lucky to be home to a woman called Judith Merrill, who's dead now. But Judy had been married. She's a great science fiction writer and editor and critic. And she had been married to Frederick Pohl, another great science fiction writer and editor. And in 1968, two things happened. Their marriage broke up and the Chicago police riots took place, and they were living in Chicago. And Judy decided she couldn't raise her children in America. So she brought them to Toronto along with the books that she got in the divorce. And she gave the books to the Toronto Public Library System, where they form the nucleus of what's now the largest science fiction reference collection in the world. Wow. And she was also involved in politics. So she knew my dad, and she was a hustler. So she had a gig on public television every week introducing Doctor Who. And when my mom was off teacher's college and my dad had me and my baby brother at the time, we would watch Judy on Doctor Who, and she'd show up and she'd be like, "Tonight's show is about time loops. I remember we invented these in 1947 at a Futurian potluck dinner. I'll never forget because Isaac Asimov wouldn't stop squeezing C.M. Kornbluth's girlfriend's ass. We wrote 13 stories about time loops that night. I took the A train to Rockefeller Center. I took them to John W. Campbell's office and threw them over his transom, and he published them in the next year." So she was really like, it was really great to watch her do this bit. And when we took a school trip to her library when I was 10 or 11 years old, I knew who she was. And she said, "Kids, if you write fiction, you can bring it to me and I'll help you make it better." And so wow. I started, she was the writer in residence there. So I started bringing her stories at a subway pass. I started going down at 10, 11,
And this
12.
is at what age?
Like 10, 11, 12, writing stories. And I was still doing it, I did it year after year. And eventually she started putting me in workshops with other writers, which is what she would do, is she sort of get the writers off her own books and onto each other's by grouping them together, showing them how to do a writer's workshop, giving them a space and a time when they could meet in one of the library's spare rooms. And so I got involved in writing workshops through her. I went to work at the world's oldest science fiction bookstore, which was founded by a science fiction fan that she bullied into founding a science fiction store. I published my first story at 17 with a magazine called On Spec that she bullied to Prairie fans, Western fans, into founding. I edited the anthology series she started, Tesseracts. I eventually worked on a TV show that was started by the people who did her Doctor Who gig at TV Ontario called Prisoners of Gravity as a consultant. We used to have, a kind of roving potluck that she founded called Hydra that I met every other professional in the field through. And even the weird alternative high school I went to had this great writing workshop when I got there, and I loved it. And years later, I found it had actually been started a decade before I got there by Judy through our Writers in the School grant. And so she really got me into this. And with Judy's work, there was never a question that it was science fiction was an activist literature, that there's something intrinsically political about imagining how else things could be. That is the core of the political imagination. And today, I work out my thoughts, my activist thoughts through writing, sometimes through writing formally in books and magazine articles and so on, but also through this daily practice of blogging. I was one of the owners. I still am one of the owners. I was one of the editors of Boing Boing. I wrote there for 19 years. I wrote about 50,000 blog posts. everything that seemed important I turned into something for public consumption rather than scribbling a note to myself in a little notebook, which meant that I had to think it through, understand why it was important to strangers. That was itself very mnemonic. It helped me discover what was important and remember it from moment to moment. But also it gave me like a literal database that I can consult, because that's what a blog is, right? I could go back and look things up by keyword. And eventually I got to this point where I started going through my old posts every day from this day, 25, 20, 15, 10, 5 years, and last year. And that makes me revisit everything I thought was important. And it's a bit like working dough and it gets dried out at the edges and you kind of fold it back into the middle. Everything that's sort of falling out of your regard comes back into the center of your focus. And so this is a powerful way to work. It helps you digest a lot of a material, but more importantly, it helps you make sense of a lot of material. It helps you contextualize it. And really, I think that this daily practice of writing and revisiting is a great exercise in contextualization, analytics. I sometimes call it object permanence, the trait that toddlers develop where they stop being interested in peekaboo because they can remember that one thing is related to a thing that happened later, something that our civilization seems very bad at. We are marveling over and over again that people who did things that were swindles then did the swindle again, and then we lost all our money. Because this book is coming out, I spent a lot of time talking to people about AI companies. One thing that keeps coming up is that Anthropic has declared itself profitable, provided you don't apply generally accepted accounting practices, right? And like, the reason we have generally accepted accounting practices is because that without them, people steal from you by lying about how profitable they are. There is no such thing as so profitable in such a cool way that it can only be captured by ignoring the standards of probity and common sense in accounting. So it's really a vast exercise in forcing myself to have more and more object permanence. And through object permanence, I think that we can understand the causal relationships that got us to where we are, and therefore infer courses of action that will get us somewhere else.
Wow, thank you. A few observations. One, I don't know, I've been doing this like 25 years. I don't know that anyone ever had as clear a mentor relationship that was so integrated into who you are and who you've become. It was just, I envy you greatly. That's just, it almost sounds miraculous.
I'm not alone. We are all Judy's kids in Canadian science fiction. I am part of a cohort. It's not like she looked at me and said, kid, you've got moxie, right? It was just anyone who hung in there and asked her for advice, she gave it to them. She was an incredible person. And she just built institutions. She wrote, she edited, she criticized, but she built institutions that outlived her.
And one thing I can see actually is that she made it seem like one could do all those different things, which is one of the things that's currently sort of remarkable about you. But she modeled that. Yeah,
it's true.
Okay, let me just also say, just for people, if you do this writing and reviewing every day, how does that work? Is it first thing in the morning? Is it sneak it in before you get to bed? Is it when you're waiting for, because everyone wishes they had that discipline.
Well, look, there's discipline is overrated and habits are underrated. And anything that is a habit is something you get for free. My kids just come back from her first year of college, but I vividly remember the years when getting her to brush her teeth was like pulling her teeth. And then there was just a day when the engine caught. And, speaking as the man who pays her dental bills, I can assure you she brushes her teeth, but I haven't had to tell her to do so in many, many years. And the same is probably true of you and everyone listening. I certainly hope so. So I cultivated the habit, and the secret to cultivating the habit of working every day was to realize, again, back to sort of object permanence and trying to evaluate things longitudinally, I realized that there were days where I felt like I was writing very badly and days where I felt like the work was going very well, and that retrospectively I could look at the work and there was work that was great and ready to go and work that needed to be completely rewritten, but that they weren't related, and that the major correlate of feeling like every word I could think of was unworthy was feeling bad. It was like missing sleep and being hungover, having a fight with my girlfriend, getting my ass kicked at the United Nations or at a standards body on behalf of EFF. Those were the things that made me feel like the work was bad. And so I still have days where I feel like everything I write is shit. Excuse me, we're going on the air, so but I don't want to get you in trouble with Brendan Carr here, where everything I write is terrible. But I just do it anyway. And thankfully, I'm not that bright. So it took me like 15 years to put two and two together and realize that if the days where I felt like the writing was terrible, it might be great. That the days when I was really happy because I thought the writing was great, it might be terrible. And I mostly put that out of my mind. But it's a mindset thing, and it requires that you revisit the work. So it requires that you revisit the work you thought was bad and realize that it wasn't. And then when you do that, you can get to a point where, a bit like cognitive behavioral therapy, you can recognize that the last time you felt this way, the consequence you were worried about didn't materialize. And so even if you have that feeling, you can rationally override that feeling by saying the feeling does not reflect an external reality.
Yeah, not all objects are permanent.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
exactly.
I mean, let me just share that I have certain habits, yoga, dietary things, certain things like that, that I'm on like 50, 55 years now,
Mm-hmm.
but other ones that are hard to start. I think that's one thing we know is starting a habit is hard. Continuing a habit is habitual.
Sure. As anyone who's ever had a bad habit can tell you, it's breaking habits is hard. So make some good habits.
Absolutely. So any response to my introduction?
I think you hit the high points. I guess you could say that this book is an investigation into the material and ideological basis for tech bubbles broadly and the AI bubble more specifically, with an eye to preventing bubbles, because I take it as read that bubbles are bad. I think that irrespective of whatever else a bubble is ultimately a lie that is intended to separate what we call retail investors or everyday savers from their life savings in order to enrich insiders who are swindling them. And, since the Reagan years, this has become much more salient because the Reagan years marked the end of the defined benefit pension, or the beginning of the end of the defined benefit pension, where your employer just says, okay, you will get X dollars indexed to inflation every month until you die after you stop working here. And instead, what you do is you put your money in the stock market and you hope that you don't lose it all. And that means that anyone who doesn't want to starve to death in their dotage has to make bets in the stock market. And that means that swindlers are really hoping to get them to bet on things that are cons, and that the consequence of that is that you lose everything, that you starve to death in your old age. And so this is a wicked thing, and we should not want bubbles, and we should want bubbles to stop immediately. Now, there are different kinds of bubbles. All bubbles are bad, but some bubbles have a productive residue. If something's a pure accounting fraud like Enron, it doesn't leave anything behind. If it's an accounting fraud married to some kind of performance, like, say, WorldCom, where they lied about having orders for fiber, but then they put the fiber in the ground, then, when they go bankrupt, they're still the fiber. And I'm speaking to you on a 2 gigabit symmetrical fiber link in Burbank that is old WorldCom fiber that AT&T lit up. And so, look, the least efficient way to have gotten that fiber in the ground is for Bernie Ebbers to have stolen billions of dollars from old people. But we still got the fiber. And I'm not saying that this justifies stealing from the old people. I'm saying that it doesn't do those old people any good to pretend the fiber is not there. And so there are bubbles that are productive, but even when they're productive, we should want them to go on as briefly as possible and be as small as possible. And so to do that, we have to know where this bubble comes from and where bubbles broadly come from. And I think we are living through a century of tech bubbles that are driven by market saturation. So, again, back to Reagan and Carter, we decided not to enforce antitrust laws, so we got monopolies. And monopolies are very harmful, but they also saturate their markets. Google's got 90% search market share. And the thing is, when your company is growing, markets like them. They value them at a higher what's called a price to earnings ratio, which is like for every dollar you bring in, your company is worth more than a company that brings in the same number of dollars but has a lower ratio. And that's not irrational. If you think that a share in a company is a claim on its future earnings, then a company that's growing has more future earnings than a company that's static. Now, the corollary of this is that when a company saturates its market and stops growing, it becomes grossly overvalued because its future earnings will be much like its present earnings or possibly smaller. And when that happens, you get these panic sell-offs. And you see these in the capital markets all the time, whenever there's the slowdown in growth. And, on the left, I think one of the things that we've done that's been quite harmful to our cause is to repeat without interrogating the idea that the ideology of growth for its own sake and without end is the ideology of a tumor, right? Because the reason companies want to grow is not ideological or not simply ideological. It is firmly grounded in material circumstances. Because when your company stops growing and its share price gets a giant haircut, first of all, if you're an executive who's been compensated in stock, then you get immediately poorer. But second of all, highly liquid growth stocks can be substituted for cash in activities that perpetuate growth. So as a company that wants to buy another company, if you've got a highly liquid growth stock, that company will probably take your stock and not cash. Stock is a great thing to buy stuff with because you produce it on the premises by typing zeros into a spreadsheet. It's an endogenous substance. Whereas cash, well, if you try to make it on the premises, the Treasury Department shows up and puts you in prison, right? You need to get a creditor or a customer or an investor to give you cash. And so there's a good reason to want to be seen as a growth company, even when you're not growing. And that's an important distinction because it gets into where the bubbles come from. Because bubbles
Exactly.
they're narrative in nature, right? They're about the story we can tell. And in the beginning, the stories they told had a high degree of plausibility and a low degree of probability. So Google said, "Oh, we're going to become Facebook because we got Google Plus." Well, like, is Facebook a market? Sure. Just look at Facebook's balance sheet. It's a market, right? And it would be valuable if that balance sheet were transferred to Google's balance sheet. On the other hand, Facebook has a lot of reasons that they will happily recount to you as to why Google is not going to become Facebook and Facebook is going to go out of business. So you have a lot of when you tell that story, right? But what if you tell a story about your ability to conquer a market that doesn't exist, that you just made up? Now, on the one hand, it's got low plausibility, right? Is cryptocurrency a thing? I don't know. But on the other hand, if cryptocurrency is not a thing, then who can say what it's worth? Right? No one can argue with you that metaverse isn't $1 trillion industry when it's something you just made up, right? It's like you made it up. You get to say how much it's worth. Now, whether or not that's an industry at all is another question. And so what we have is this series of narrative adventures kind of running across the river on the backs of alligators, hoping desperately not to lose a leg, hoping that there's a new story by the time the old one starts to collapse. And we go through them: metaverse, cryptocurrency, Web3, DAOs, what were those beanie babies called? The collectible, digital collectible, NFTs, all of these bubbles. And now we get AI. But AI is different. And AI is different because it's much bigger. Mark Zuckerberg spent $61 billion on the metaverse. He's already spent $150 billion on AI in 3 years. And he says it's another $150 billion this year. And it's going to go up from there. And it's not just him. When I wrote the book, the bubble was a $700 billion bubble. A year later, it's a $1.4 trillion bubble. And the only thing worse than a $1.4 trillion bubble is a $2.8 trillion bubble, which I think
is coming.
Yeah. And so where did that come from? Well, some of it is material. I'm a pretend computer scientist. I have a honorary doctorate in computer science from the Open University, where I'm also a visiting professor of CS. And I look at AI and I see a phenomenon in which some researchers took a existing technique and applied a variation to it with the expectation that the result would be commensurate with the variation, that a small variation would produce a small gain or loss in the outcome. What they got instead was a very large variation for the better in the output. And those are great. Those breakthroughs are amazing. But this was actually a doubly interesting breakthrough because it scaled. So usually if there's a piece of low-hanging fruit, it isn't the first of 100 pieces of low-hanging fruit.
Right.
But it turns out that if you just did the AI trick harder, you got more out of it. Now, we are reaching an era of diminishing returns, which is always going to happen. But it's not crazy to have observed a technique that produced positive outcomes to scale and to have tried to scale it. That's just like, that's smart. So that's the material basis for it. But I think much more important is the ideological basis, because I don't think that accounts for it. Because as interesting as that is to me as a computer scientist or pretend computer scientist, I don't understand why that's a pitch for an investor, right? Maybe it's a pitch for Sandia National Labs, right? Or like the, National Science Research Foundation grant. But why is it worth billions of dollars to Mark Zuckerberg's shareholders or to Microsoft? And for that, I think we have to understand just the insatiable historic horniness of bosses to replace mouthy workers with pliable machines. And
yeah, you can't lose betting on that.
Yeah, and that's exactly the right formulation, because while billionaires probably, at least many of them, believe the AI hype, what they believe is something much more important, which is that their salesmen can convince bosses that the AI hype is real, which is really where the story comes from, right? That's what matters, right? Even if you believed in AI, if you thought that no one could sell it, why would you invest in it, right? And contrary wise, even if you think AI is nonsense, if you think it can be sold, why wouldn't you invest in it? And AI is a very solipsistic phenomenon, ideologically speaking. Sartre told us hell is other people. He wasn't wrong. People suck, and the reason they suck is that they're great, but they refuse to acknowledge that you're right and they're wrong when you want to do something that involves them. And so AI is the promise of doing things that require other people, but taking the people away. Screenplays without screenwriters, movies without actors, hospitals without doctors.
Let me cut in for 1 second, which
Yeah.
is when I was speaking with Jonathan Taplin about his book, the one about reality, where he says these people basically want to escape responsibility, escape living with other people, escape the planet. It's like their problem is all the other people.
Yeah.
And basically what AI does is handle their biggest problem.
I don't think it's unique to them. I mean, I think one of the reasons that we see AI boyfriends and AI girlfriends proliferating is that romance without romantic partners is seductive, because it's hard to be in a relationship. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the thing that's winning here is not robot girlfriends, but robot boyfriends, because I think it is inarguably harder to be the partner of a man than a woman. Speaking as a man married to a woman. And so, I think we're all prone to it, but billionaires inhabit a world where they can already pretend that it's this way without the AI, and where right. Indeed they must. So first of all, they're surrounded by people who just glaze them all day long. It's just like a tongue bath from sunrise to sunset if you've got billions. But also, how do you make billions and inflict the harm on masses of people that are implied by billions, unless you don't think those other people are real? Right? In some sense, those people can't be real. So we have this phenomenon of Elon Musk calling people who disagree with him an NPC. I think that, I know he's kidding, but I don't think he's really kidding. We have this saying, sometimes we say, ha ha, only serious, like as opposed to ha ha, only joking. I think this is ha ha, only serious. I think he's telling on himself. And so in some ways, I think one of the reasons billionaires believe that solipsism as a service is a winning proposition is they have firsthand experience of the joys of solipsism.
They're already experiencing it. Yes.
Yeah. And if you're a boss, right, and you like wake up every day haunted by the knowledge that if you don't show up for work, everything is fine. But if the workers don't show up, everything stops. You have to ask yourself, am I really in the driver's seat, or am I in the back seat with a Fisher-Price steering wheel? And AI is the possibility of taking that toy steering wheel and wiring it directly into the drivetrain of the car, where you just have an idea and it turns into a product, and you don't have to have ego-shattering confrontations with people who know how to do things, who say, no, it won't scale, the code doesn't work, it creates security vulnerabilities. What about all these people it's going to harm because you haven't thought of them, because you have a narrow perspective? It is going to get us in trouble with the law. It's technologically impossible, and you fooled yourself with your vibe coded demo, and it's actually not doing what you think it's going to do, and so on and so on and so on. All of those things are a bummer. And and I live in Burbank. I live around the corner from the studios. And while I'm not in the Writers Guild, I'm in the Animators Guild and the Writers Unit. So I solidarity struck with the writers when they were out on the picket line whenever I was in town that summer. And one of the writers told me, you prompt an LLM the same way you give notes to a writer's room, right? Make me tea, but it's about a dog and there's a love interest and a car chase. And admittedly, that is the plot of Air Bud. But, you know, realistically, if you actually say that to a writer's room, they're all going to roll their eyes. They're going to call you stupid. And they're going to say, go push your pencils, go make a spreadsheet. The grown-ups are here making a movie. We know how to do things you don't, right? Whereas the chatbot just poops out a script. Now, the fact that the script isn't very good, if you don't respect your workers, you're like, okay, well, I'll keep one of them around to make the script shootable, right? Because all I need to do is go. I just rewatched. I just rewatched Get Shorty last night, and Chili Palma says, "No, writing the script's not that hard. We'll write it, and then we'll get a writer to put the commas in." Right. And so if if you have that little respect for the people who do the job, then you're like, yeah, I'll just get a monkey to come in and do the final polish on the work that I do with my chatbot. That's like a writer, except it never tells me I'm stupid. And so, I totally get why, as a billionaire, you would allocate capital to something where that's the sales pitch. And so, that's what I think is going on. Maybe now we can talk about what to do about it, and like what kinds of criticism are productive and what kinds of criticism are unproductive. But I think that's the lie of the land. That's how we got here.
Very, very good. And it's a great moment because we're right at the halfway point, and I want to tell people that this is Freeform, a world that just might work. I'm Terrence McNally. I'm speaking today with science fiction author, activist, journalist CORY DOCTOROW. We're talking about AI and the hell of a lot of society and everything else that seems to be revolving around it right now. He published in Shitification, Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It last fall. His latest book, just out, is The Reverse Centaur's Guide to Life After AI. His website is craphound, one word, craphound.com, and he maintains a daily blog at pluralistic.net. Since the title of the new book may be mysterious to people, let's jump back into the conversation with what is a centaur and what is a reverse centaur, and how does this distinction and sort of this set of relationships, flow out of everything you've just set up, the big behind the scenes picture.
Well, the question of automation and labor is an old one. It goes at least as far back as the first science fiction novel, which was Frankenstein, which was written by Mary Shelley as an allegory that was meant to be sympathetic to the Luddites, whom she was a great fan of, as was her husband. His maiden speech in the House of Lords was a speech in defense of Luddites. And the question is, how is it that you could have a group of skilled workers? And I should say here, everything you've heard about the Luddites is wrong. The Luddites weren't technophobes. The Luddites were the most skilled technical workers of their day. To operate a weaving machine took a 7-year apprenticeship. It was like getting a PhD in electrical engineering from MIT. And so these guys weren't afraid of machines, right? So how is it that you have people who work with machines all day and who value their own work and who are reliable narrators of their experience, who look at a different machine that is qualitatively just seems like more of the same and not like a big qualitative difference, and say that machine is bad and this machine is good? And in a modern context, you might say, how is it that we have programmers who are skilled programmers and reliable narrators of their own life experience who say, I use AI and it's amazing. And boy, am I writing the best code of my life right now. And I can't believe how productive and how exciting it is that I'm doing this stuff with AI. And then you have this other group of equally skilled programmers who are equally reliable in narrating their own life experience who say, AI is destroying my craft. Don't trust anything software based ever again, because the software is all coming out of an AI and none of it is fit for purpose. So how to resolve this conundrum? Well, in AI or in automation theory, we see something of an answer. We see that it's a commonplace in the history of automation that when workers adopt automation, they do so broadly to improve quality. And when capital adopts automation, they do so broadly to improve throughput, not necessarily because of like their outlook, but because of their economic relationship to it. If you are investing in a machine and then you're putting on your balance sheet and you're depreciating it off the balance sheet over a certain number of years, you want to maximize the return on that machine. And so you want to use the machine as much as possible. And so this brings me to centaurs and reverse centaurs. So a centaur is a person who is assisted by a machine. So the metaphor here is that you are a thoughtful, subjective human body, a human head that knows what you want and is interested in your own well-being, and that you are atop the tireless body of a machine that can work longer and faster than you possibly can, and lift weights that you can't lift, and perform feats that you can't perform, and you get to direct it. You're the head, it's the body. And so that's you with a spell checker, you with a word processor, you with a bicycle. You're a centaur. You even look like a centaur when you're riding a bicycle, right? And then we have reverse centaurs. It's kind of obvious what that is. That's the machine's head on the human's body. That's the human being conscripted to take direction from the machine, to be a peripheral to a machine. And again, this is like, it's not uncommon to have this be a central way of understanding the problem of automation, that when the boss sets the pace with automation, things go wrong, right? This is Charlie Chaplin in modern times. This is Lucy and Ethel putting chocolates in the chocolate box on the assembly bell, on the assembly line. Look, there's lots of cooks who have machines in their kitchen. The thing that none of those machines do is deliberately run at a speed where if the cook takes their eye off it for one instant, the whole thing goes awry. In fact, quite the reverse. There are processes like that in the kitchen, and cooks go to great lengths to minimize them, not maximize them. But if you want to use the machine as much as possible before it's used up, then you use up the people in the course of using
That's
the
right.
machine.
You don't just
That's
use
right.
them, you use them up. And this is the Amazon driver that I'm stopped behind on a one-way street. And I'm honking at him because find a damn place to park before you get out of the truck.
But that driver has got, so that driver's pay scale varies between 10 and 50 cents per parcel. So there's a 500% swing, and it's entirely dependent on meeting the quota set by the machine in the manner prescribed by the machine. So this is the other part. If you drive to a housing complex and it says you can park the van here and make all your deliveries, and you go, wait, the third delivery is at a building a half a mile away, I should drive the van there. You can't do that. You lose points if you do that. Katie Wells, who's a great scholar of this stuff, actually interviewed a bunch of current and former Amazon drivers, one of whom had been fired for unsafe maneuvers. And the unsafe maneuver in question was swerving when a 16-wheeler crossed the median because the driver had fallen asleep. And so you have to obey the machine's dicta. And that means that you're being used, but you're being used up. You know, Amazon warehouses are the most automated warehouses in the world. They also have 3 times the injury rate of other warehouses in the sector. And so, you know, that's not a coincidence. Those two facts are linked. They're not, one's not an unfortunate consequence of the other. It is the inevitable consequence of making a 7-figure capital investment with a short amortization schedule where humans are the bottleneck. And so you work the machine as fast as you can, which is set by as fast as the human can work, which is determined as like the fastest the human can work before they get burned out or maimed and then get replaced by another human, and not the fastest the human can work and go home at the end of the day and say, well, that was a good day.
Right, right. And you by the way, at one point you were just talking about the creative person who on the one side, who believes that AI is very helpful, miraculous, blah, blah, blah. You're somewhere in the middle. You're, as you describe it in the book, your relationship with AI is you are the centaur.
Sure. Yeah, I use it for some commonplace things. It would be very weird to be like ideologically opposed to statistical inference. That's just a very strange thing not to like. That's probably weirder than anything in Leviticus. You know, to say, no, I just knowing things by making inferences about stats is not kosher, right? That's a weird trait to have. So I am not I'm not someone who says statistical inference is bad. I do say that like overriding local people's priorities to cite data centers is bad. I do say that like deliberately setting out to destroy the livelihoods of workers is bad. I do say that carbon emissions are bad and so on. But, you know, if you've got a local model on your computer, which, you know, I've got Olama and Whisper and a few others that I've just downloaded from the internet. I run on my commodity laptop that doesn't even have a GPU in it. And if you've got that local model on your computer, using it is not harming people and it's not harming the environment any more than using the fiber in the ground that we are conversing over is harming the old people who had their money stolen by Bernie Ebbers to put it there.
Right, right. Or the bicycle you're riding.
Or yeah, indeed.
Exactly. It's that simple.
You know, if you don't like the people who made LLMs, wait till I tell you about the people who made microchips, right? Because like the Nobel Prize for designing the silicon transistor goes to William Shockley, the man who became such an ardent eugenicist.
Eugenics, right?
Yeah, he used his Nobel money to offer cash prizes to black women who had their tubes tied in a bid to rid the earth of black people, right? That's the silicon transistor. Otherwise, we would all be using gallium arsenide semiconductors. And so, you know, like you don't have to say that you are lionizing or forgiving or even liking Robert Shockley just because you have a silicon transistor or several trillion of them indeed in your home. It's not an endorsement.
What I think is key in your approach, and I mentioned it briefly in the intro, is that you go a step back, you go upstream. So that the question is not good or bad. The question that you really focus on is the power relationship between not just the machine and the human, but the people who bought the machine and paid the humans. And back.
And also, I think in a very trenchant way, I want to know which courses of action detonate the bubble most quickly. And ideally also hold the people responsible for it to account, and which courses of action prolong it, which is where you get into this idea of crita hype, which comes from the STS scholar at Virginia Tech, Lee Vinsel. And crita hype is basically repeating the claims of a booster, but adding at the end of it in brackets, and that's bad, right? So Mark Zuckerberg goes around and says like, call me Cyber Rasputin because where MK Ultra and Mesmer failed, I have succeeded. I built a mind control ray. I did it with big data, and I can sell anything to anyone. And then his critics go around and they say, Mark Zuckerberg has built a mind control ray. This is terrible. Now I know why Grampy is a QAnon. It's not because he was always racist and Mark Zuckerberg introduced him to other racists so that he could have a place where he could feel very comfortable and emboldened to be as racist as he's always wanted to be. It's because Mark Zuckerberg built a mind control ray. And then Mark Zuckerberg's salespeople go out on sales calls and people say, why should I pay a 40% premium to advertise on Facebook? And they'll go, well, don't take my word for it. Ask my critics. I work for Cyber Rasputin. He can sell anything to anyone. He built a mind control ray. And we get a lot of that in AI. We get a lot of people who do not distinguish between my boss is such a credulous dolt that he can be convinced to fire me and replace me with AI that can't do my job. And this AI will do my job and therefore it endangers me. And every time you say the latter, you harm your own cause. You give companies more investment capital to pay salespeople to convince your boss to fire you. And you probably alienate some of the people on the buy side. Now, there are people who are quite concerned with the welfare of the people who make the things that they use. But a lot of people just want the thing. And if you can make the thing more cheaply at the expense of the worker, a lot of people will be like, yeah, it's okay. Like, so I have a very personal relationship with one of the stories about AI automation, which is that I have cancer. It's a very treatable cancer. In fact, I had a PET scan yesterday and I am cancer free as of yesterday.
Congratulations.
Very good news. I mean, I think I've been cancer free for a while, but now it's official. And the person who told me that was a radiologist. And radiologists are one of those groups of people who the AI people say they can replace. Now, what they actually say is we have research that shows that sometimes radiologists miss tumors that AI catches, right? And so if
that is true.
That's true. It's true. Well, I think it's true. I'm not qualified to assess it. I'm not a radiologist.
But it could well be true.
True. It's a peer-reviewed paper in a reputable journal that's been widely cited. I don't know if it's been replicated, but all the indicia of reliability surround that claim. So let's stipulate that it's true. That doesn't mean that the sales call down at the hospital goes like this. Hey, I tell you what, we got a thing that sometimes catches stuff that your radiologists miss. So here at the Kaiser Hospital in Sunset in LA, you're employing 3 radiologists at $1 million a year, 300 grand a pop. How about you fire 2 of them? and then I take $300,000 home for my boss, and you take $300,000 that you put in your pocket, and we take the remaining one and we just make him sign the reports that come out of the chatbot, and he can take the blame if someone dies. That's the sales call that's almost certainly happening. What's not happening is, hey, between them, those 3 radiologists are assessing 100 X-rays a day. We're going to give them some software. It's going to catch some of the things they miss. So it's going to fall to 98 a day. But you're going to save people's lives because you're going to catch cancers that the radiologist would have missed. And it's going to cost you an extra $500,000 a year. So your radiology bill is going to go up to $1.5 million, but you're going to save people's lives. That's not the sales pitch. Now, maybe I like Kaiser. Okay, I mean, they're union busters, but Kaiser's taken good care of me. And they seem to frequently act in a way that makes me think they care about my health. I say that under advisement as a Canadian who grew up under socialized medicine. So I can recognize, at least again, like the signs and indicia of a system that is designed to keep you well instead of to make money. And there are many interactions I have with the Kaiser system that look like this. And so maybe that Kaiser hospital administrator is that rare gem who says, why are you talking about firing to my radiologist? We're going to hire one more, and we're going to get the chatbot to mark all of their homework. And then they're going to go back and review the stuff that the chatbot gets wrong. And we're going to raise the money from somewhere to take it out of my paycheck to pay that extra radiologist, right? If even if that were the case, no one is giving Sam Altman or Dario Amodei money on the expectation that that's what the sales call sounds like, right?
That's right.
Everyone thinks that the sales call is about replacing workers with labor. Now, if you're like me and you have cancer, you might say to yourself, if you think that you can basically make radiology too cheap to meter, look, I am grateful for the radiologists working now and before who saved so many lives, but the point of radiology is to stop cancer, not to employ radiologists. And so if we can't employ radiologists anymore, let's find a stipend for them, but let's not say, well, this is the way it should, let's not create a jobs program for radiologists. Let's give them a jobs program as oil painters or something. And let's just make sure people don't get cancer. But if you understand that the configuration is this reverse centaur configuration, where what they're doing is converting radiologists into accountability sinks so that they can kill people, save money, and not take the blame, then you as a person with cancer, even if you don't care about the well-being of radiologists, you still don't want this arrangement. So radiologists, and I'll say here, because I've heard from some radiologists, they have a lot of labor power. So even though the sales call is about firing radiologists, the actual implementation is mostly just radiologists getting better tools, which I'm very happy about. But if your radiologist is worried about getting fired, and the thing you tell people is, it's going to take my job, as opposed to it's going to kill you, you're going to have a lot few people lined up to support you than if you're actually telling them the story about it taking their jobs.
Right. Oh, let me just say a couple of things that when you say the human is in the loop to take the blame, that was very quick in your story. I want you to just go into that one more second so people get it. In other words, we've talked about you do the work and AI reviews it, or AI does the work and you review it. And the difference is, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So, well, I'll give you, so this is all about this notion that Dan Davies came up with called accountability sinks, which is more or less what it sounds like. But I'll give you an example. So Air Canada, flagship carrier in Canada, they don't like doing customer service. Like all airlines, they're too big to fail, too big to jail, too big to care. It's like Lily Tomlin, we don't care, we don't have to, we're the phone company, right? And so long time ago, they moved their customer service function mostly to the Pacific Rim. So now you call a number and you speak to someone in another country, and they're generally pretty bright. I mean, you don't get a job in a call center unless you're fluent in English, you got a university degree, and so on. It doesn't matter how bright they are, because they're not allowed to diverge from a script, and the script doesn't solve your problems. So if that's what you're doing, right? Like if you've got a job, you don't care if it's done well, why wouldn't you fire all those people and replace them with AI? Which is what they did. They fired a bunch of them, replaced them with AI. And this guy whose grandmother died gets on with a chatbot and says, my grandmother's dead, I need a bereavement fare, what's the procedure? And the chatbot says, oh, just buy a full fare ticket, send us the death certificate, when you get back from the funeral, we refund you the difference. And he does this, and they're like, no, the chatbot hallucinated, and you can't have your money back because you did the wrong procedure, and it's not our fault, it's the chatbot's fault. Why are you blaming us? Right? Like This is the universe's problem, or maybe it's a you problem, but it's not an us problem. And this guy, he went through the whole Air Canada procedure, 12 weeks of fighting with them, and then he appealed it to the ombudsman in British Columbia, and then finally got his $700 back. And there's gonna be a lot of people for whom 700 or 200 or 50 or 75, whatever they're entitled to, that the chatbot lies to them about, it's just not worth it. And for the people who are, well, they're going to do a lot of legwork to get their money back. And so Air Canada comes out ahead. And so you can see how this accountability sink, it's not just a wage saver, it's also a mechanism to cheat for profit without assuming the blame.
Okay, and what other thing plays in that, especially with the radiologist, is automation blindness.
Sure. So TSA, it's a funny thing when we ask spot checkers to go through a security checkpoint and try and smuggle a gun or a bomb through, they almost always get it through. But if you try and take a bottle of water through a checkpoint, they will catch it every time. They are the water bottle identifyingest people in all of human history. And it's because they practice all day. Going back to our habits at the beginning of this conversation, these people get like 8 to 10 hours a day of practice looking at water bottles and x-rays. And you cannot remain attuned to phenomena that do not occur in your life, right? You just can't, especially when you're being asked to be attuned to a competing stimulus. And so they become de-skilled in spotting bombs and very skilled at spotting water bottles. And this is automation blindness. And if you're the radiologist and the chatbot is right, say it's right 98% of the time, and you're right 98% of the time, and it's a different 2%. So the chatbot catches your mistakes and you catch the chatbot's mistakes, but you are asked to work at a pace that is commensurate with having fired all your colleagues and turning you into accountability sink. Your job is to basically click okay, and then go, wait, maybe that one wasn't okay. We all know that you're going to miss that one. We have all missed that in our own lives, right? That it's what they call a dark pattern. I'm not a huge fan of that. I think it makes the cheating sound more grandiose than it is. But a company will show you a series of dialogue boxes, which is like, do you want free shipping? Yes. Do you want notifications? Yes. Do you want to sign up for an annual subscription for $5,000? And you click yes, and you're like, wait. I just clicked yes 10 times in a row. I didn't mean to click it that time. It's well understood. And I don't know if every human is like this. I used to work with a guy at the science fiction bookstore who loved shelf reading. He would love going and making sure everything was in alphabetical order, and he could do it for hours perfectly. He got very angry at us for books that were de-alphabetized. And like when I say they were alphabetized, science fiction writers like write long multiple series and they interact. We had all these complex rules for like, well, if this is a prequel, but it's a prequel that is also the first book of this other series, it goes here. And you would just have 2 books by the author on the shelf, but you'd have to apply 17 rules to know which one went first. And the rest of us would just go like, there's just 2 of them. And this guy would actually like every time apply the logic, and he could do it perfectly every time. So maybe there's people out there who have the correct neuroanatomy to do this, but most of us don't. Certainly not enough to babysit all the AIs.
Okay, I have 2 big questions, and hopefully you can answer both of them. And by the way, there's a million other small questions that I didn't get to ask, but this has been incredibly fruitful. Okay. I have long said that humanity will die by convenience, that we will sacrifice everything if it's just a little easier. I mean, obviously, buy it now, have it delivered in an hour is one of those examples. Reading your book, I thought we may also die by efficiency. And could you just talk about how you see those two? And I'm talking about them in big, sort of the big way. And with efficiency, it's like the way economists define efficiency, which is not the way a human being would.
Yeah. So look, I'm actually not a huge fan of the convenience is a problem framework, because I think that it requires it's a useful term from people I mostly disagree with. It requires a certain degree of epistemic humility, where you have to say not everyone has the same priorities or needs as I do. And if I am going to be humble in my understanding what other people require and what constraints they operate under, I will stipulate that there's good reasons for people wanting things to be convenient, right? Because they have something else they want to do. And that thing is important, and it might be getting home to like give their kid insulin or something, right? Like it might just be important. And so there's no Yeah, I'm all for doing things slowly and carefully if you want to, paying attention to parts of the process if that's good for you. But I'm not never going to tell you like you should pick the cashier with the longest line at the grocery store, right? I mean, there's just no virtue in that. It's some people might be like, I'd like to really just like sort of relax and do some people watching, and that's my thing. Great, but convenience in itself is not wrong.
It's not a bad, yeah.
Yeah. Now, efficiency. So economists, um, they, well, I mean, the real problem of economics is that as we've practiced it for the last 45, 50 years, we've treated it as a computational science and not as a social science. And we've said that it is that everything that is important about how decisions get made and resources get allocated can be reduced to a mathematical model. And where we meet quantitative or qualitative factors in outcomes, we can quantize them without a loss of fidelity that would compromise the model. And, Milton Friedman very famously said, all models are wrong, some models are useful, by which he meant, even if you have a model that you know to be wrong, right, know to be inaccurate, if it makes good predictions, you can rely on it. And the problem with this is that if every time you ring the telephone or flush the toilet, the telephone rings, and you don't know why, and you assume the telephone is being rung by the toilet, you will eventually need to ring the telephone, and no, it doesn't matter how much you flush the toilet, you'll get it wrong. So understanding causal relationships is important, right? And if you just assume that the model is predictive, what you end up doing is not predicting what's going to happen, but determining what's going to happen. So like one of the precepts of this school of economics is something called revealed preference, where if someone says they want X, but they do Y, you assume that what they really wanted was Y all along, and they either were lying to you or themselves. The problem with this is that if you take power out of the relationship, right, out of the transaction, because you can't model it well, because it's not math, then you observe a person who sold their kidney to make rent, and you go look at that person with a revealed preference for one kidney, right? And you just say, well, the market is efficient, right? The market has produced an outcome in which everyone is better off. This person wanted an apartment to live in, the other person wanted a kidney. The market facilitated that transaction. How do I know that everyone got what they wanted? Because it's what they did. It's a syllogism. And so it is through the application of political economy where we do understand that there are economics and that there are efficiencies, and that efficiencies are in themselves not bad. Again, like if we can make solar panels more efficient, that's good. And more efficient, by the way, includes reducing the amount of labor input to a solar panel. Like if you want to be a solar panel hobbyist and worked, in your spare hours on making a solar panel in your basement, sure. But I want everyone to have a solar panel. So I want solar panels to be as cheap as possible, made with as few materials as possible, and with as few energy inputs as possible, so that we can have energy that's abundant, and we can get off of carbon or hydrocarbons, rather, fossil fuels. So, if you factor in political economy and you factor in the politics alongside of the economics, then you can acknowledge that there are things that are objectively faster, or that are objectively cheaper in terms of their material or their labor or their energy inputs, but that these things are not free floating. They don't have value that is free floating. Their value also always has to be viewed in context of the political outcome you want to produce. And I know we're short on time, but I'll give you an example, my favorite example of this, if I can. David Nutt was the drug czar under the coalition government in the UK. And he's a psychopharmacologist, really smart guy. And they wanted to reassess the illegality of all the drugs that they had banned. And find out, which ones should carry long sentences, short sentences, which ones should have some uses that were permitted, which should have lots of uses, which ones should be restricted, which ones should be banned, and so on. And so he gathered an expert panel, and he had them rate each of the substances in the that were under consideration numerically based on how harmful they were to the people who used them, to their family, and to a wider society. And then he did some modeling to see whether some of them had consistent ratings, right? Some of them were always good, some of them were always bad. It didn't matter which of those priorities you thought was most important. If you discounted the harm to the user, but reified entirely harms to society, some drugs were always at the top and some drugs were always at the bottom, and vice versa. But in the middle was a whole group that changed places depending on your political priority. And he went to Parliament and he said, I can't tell you whether harms to the user, to family, or to society are more important, right? That is a political question. But when you make that political determination, I can empirically determine what your policy should be, right? And so that's like a perfect example of political economy, because you're doing math, but you're doing math on the part that is quantitative, and the qualitative questions are being relegated to political discourse, and you're not substituting economics for politics, which is in fact just substituting politics for politics, because it's the politics of rich people deciding what we do and pretending that it's the economy deciding what we do.
Yeah, one thing we didn't get a chance to talk about is that whole thing that, again, lies, as I sort of say, upstream of all of this, which is the notion of an event inevitability, which you as a you tell us, you as a sci-fi writer, you know, inevitability would put all sci-fi writers out of business.
Sure. To hell with there is no alternative, I think, is 6 alternatives before breakfast. Yeah.
Yeah. At one point I had a question that basically said, Tina, neoliberalism, inequality, discuss, but we won't get to that. My last one, which I have to do, is just what should I think people are going to be kind of shaken in sort of what they have been thinking, maybe alarmed. What should they do?
Yeah, look, I wish, back to hell as other people, I wish you could just solve it on your own. I wish you could make a bunch of personal consumption choices. Wouldn't that be lovely if we could just shop our way out of a monopoly? But it's like recycling your way out of a wildfire. It's just not going to happen. So if you want to make systemic changes, you have to be part of the system. You have to transcend individuality. You have to become part of a polity, and you have to work with groups. And so the first group I'm going to recommend to you is the Electronic Frontier Foundation. That's the group I've worked for 25 years. I think it's the most important and most effective digital rights group in the world. We're a member-supported nonprofit. Most of our money comes from individual donors, and we have lots of ways you can get involved, including but not limited to writing a check. I will also recommend that you join or start a union. And so if you are in a workplace without a union, call a union and ask them to speak to an organizer. There are lots of unions that are organizing and have active organizers. SEIU is a good one. So is the UAW right now. But if you're in tech, I would urge you especially to reach out to techsolidarity.org and the Tech Workers Coalition, which have teams of organizers that will help you organize your workplace. Remember, Jeff Bezos doesn't let his programmers show up for work with, pink hair and facial piercings and a black t-shirt that says something that the boss doesn't understand but makes them uncomfortable, and then makes the people who drive the vans pee in a bottle because he likes the former and hates the latter. He's just scared of the latter quitting, and he's increasingly less scared of that. And there's nothing about working at a computer all day instead of driving a van that says you can't be made to piss in a bottle. And so that's coming for you. The future is here. It's just not evenly distributed, as Billion Gibson said. And the place where the future is pooling up thick and fast is around those drivers, those warehouse workers, and it's coming for you. So get involved in a union. And the third one is get involved in politics. And I know party politics are very difficult. I know that right now is maybe a low point, especially nationally in party politics, but locally, a lot of these AI questions are being determined. And as we saw in New York, Zoran Mamdani has shown us that there's a lot of power in local offices, but it's not just him who showed us this. It was the Moms for Liberty, right? And Moms for Liberty showed us that if the dumbest people in the world can take office in these ill-regarded, seemingly insignificant local offices, they can make gigantic material changes in the lived experience of people in those cities. And those changes don't have to be for the worse. And if Moms for Liberty can do it, so can you. So get involved in your local politics.
Excellent. Excellent. I really appreciate that. Again, the newest book is The Reverse Centaur's Guide to Life After AI. The website for Cory is craphound, one word, craphound.com, and the daily blog is at pluralistic.net. Thank you, Cory Doctorow. Keep up your good work. And let me just tell people, for this conversation and many other interviews, articles, to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY.net, or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same website. If you want to get my weekly email announcement that tells you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and links to articles you are going to want to share that flesh out the conversation, email me at TEMcNally, TEMCNALLY at mac.com. You can sign up at my site to get that weekly announcement. You can also sign up for the podcast at all of those podcast sites, and you'll find really, I looked at Apple the other day, over 700 in the archives, over 700, including CORY like 10 years ago. Thanks to Kiana Williams in production, George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices, and most of all, you, my listeners, please share this podcast widely. CORY, keep up your good work.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.